Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Ending Physician Overwhelm. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. Today, we are going to be talking about an acronym that I love every time I hear it, and I don't always remember it. But today, we're going to talk about it, and that acronym is DOSE. Now, I didn't come up with this, and I am not a neurochemist, so we're going to talk about it from a very practical, real world uh, place, but we're basically talking about the neurotransmitters dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and epinephrine, and considering how these neurotransmitters play a role in our day to day experience. Where are we getting hits of these neurotransmitters in our habits, in our day to day? And are those hits working? Or maybe we're missing some areas, and we can explore that too. We are going to talk today about food and alcohol, and I know that those can be triggering topics. As an obesity medicine physician and someone who has struggled with disordered eating, who has alcohol addiction in the family, I know very well that these can be difficult topics. And so, if today is not the day for you to hear this episode, feel free to skip it. I hope you'll come back to it if you're feeling ready. We're not going to do an extensive discussion on disordered eating, but I know that that's going to come up in some minds of some of us because I know that I am not alone in having struggled with these things. So, with that being said, here we go. When we think about fixing burnout, about ending overwhelm, about fixing all of the challenges within medicine, what is often not enough of a part of the conversation is creating spaces in our lives for more enjoyment, for more well roundedness, to be quite honest. That does come up in some discussions, but I find that we have a lot of discussions where we focus on all the terrible statistics around burnout, and we look at how healthcare systems and insurance companies and big for profit hospitals, all of it contributes to the very excessive workload that healthcare providers, including physicians, although not only physicians, face in their day to day lives and how that impacts them. We talk about that a lot in some lectures, right? If you go to any physician well-being conference, you'll be smacked in the face with all of these terrible numbers. And we are often also seeing lectures that tell us to do yoga, that tell us to sleep more. And there's this huge mismatch between, all right, well, if I'm being overworked over here by a broken healthcare system, and I would feel better over here if I was magically sleeping more and doing yoga, how do I make those two things fit together? That individual level problem is not going to be solved in conferences and big systems. It really does take us tuning into ourselves to be able to notice, how are we showing up? Where are we getting these essential neurochemicals that we'll talk about in more detail? Where are we getting those? Because as humans, we are driven to seek these neurotransmitters out. There are physiologic reasons and evolutionary reasons why we seek pleasure and reward, and why um, we're able to mount a heart rate response in response to stresses, including good and bad stresses. There are reasons for this, and it is natural that our bodies seek them in some way. But unfortunately, it's very easy for us to fall into habits where we are seeking them in ways that are not really in alignment with what we want for our goals, for our health, for our career, for just the day to day experience. And so that is what we're going to look at today. I invite you, if you are able, to pull out a journal or pull out the notes app on your phone, whatever you'd like to do. And as we talk through these things, to jot down, all right, well, how is that showing up in my life? so that we can start to work on making a change. All right, so let's kick it off with our good friend dopamine. Dopamine is an important neurotransmitter, as we know, and I think we've heard a lot more about dopamine in casual conversations, probably in the last 5 to 10 years. It doesn't seem like we talked about it very much beforehand, but I don't know. I've also only been an adult in my 40s for 4 years, so it's possible that it was just conversations happening at different phases in people's lives. Anyway, I will not belabor that more, but dopamine is a hormone, a neurotransmitter chemical in our brains and probably other places in our bodies, right? We know that it's active other places, but its role is really to help reinforce behaviors that lead to our continuation as individuals and as a species, right? Is a pleasure and reward hormone. If I get some pleasure when I find the berry bush and eat a lot of ripe berries, right? The pleasure from the sugar that's there, that reinforces in my brain that finding a bush with ripe berries on it is a good thing to do in order to stay alive. Um, if I have, let's see, pleasure from reproducing, right? That is something that is going to help expand the species, right? So there is a pleasurable reward for sex that keeps us coming back to it, right? So that we will procreate and continue the species. There are reasons why we feel this way. And we are also living in a time where we have lots of engineered dopamine experiences that, let's be honest, are frankly hijacking a lot of natural pleasures that are out there. I've talked about this before. I can't remember how far back, but let's look at the explosion of sugar and processed food products, right? Which are literally designed in a laboratory to keep us coming back for more, to really light up our brains. Now, not everybody responds to sugar in that way, but if you do, and I'm with you, right? If you get this big flood of dopamine and you feel really good when you eat ice cream or something sweet, we could throw alcohol in this bucket too, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. But if we get that big reward, it keeps us coming back to that behavior, right? And when that does, this is our natural system that has been hijacked by a very concentrated and artificial form of something that doesn't exist in nature, right? There's nothing as sweet as ice cream in nature. So we were supposed to get this little hit of pleasure from eating the berries or the fruit, right? Which would help our species and help to spread seeds and berry seeds, elsewhere in the environment. There is a natural pleasure that we are supposed to derive from that. But that pleasure again has been sort of manipulated and hijacked into a lot of places that we see. So we can look at the food industry, we can look at our phones and social media, we can look at alcohol, which is parallel to the food, but it's still there. We can look at any number of other substances, right, that give us intense pleasure reward. Gambling, pornography, right? These are all things that people can aggressively overuse these days in a desire to get that flood of feel good chemical. And is there anything wrong with that? I would say that there's probably some things wrong, certainly with some of those sources, and especially those sources when used to excess. If we think about this, is a weird example, but I'm going to go there, right? If we think about porn, there may not be anything wrong with sexual pleasure and sexual stimulation, but there's a dose effect there that can be very, very dangerous and problematic. And of course, if we go in even deeper, right, we could argue that the porn industry, not unlike the processed food industry, right, is manipulating and in some very real ways harming us in order to produce this flood of neurotransmitter chemicals that has us coming back for more. I think it's important that we recognize that we are not broken for lighting up in response to some of these really, relatively intense uh, triggers for a dopamine response. We are not broken or wrong, right? That is our internal wiring. But if we step back a little bit and we see, where am I currently getting those hits of dopamine during my day? Are they in alignment with what you think is a good idea for you? Is it in alignment with your health goals? Is it actually contributing good things to your life? I would say most of the time, these artificial, very strong stimulators of dopamine are not producing good results in our lives. I know for me, I have a brain that really lights up with sugar. Um, it lights up some with alcohol. There are specific things, right, that I can tell, like, ooh, it really makes me want more of that thing, and I don't like that feeling. I don't think I've shared this. I decided that in 2025, I'm just not having any alcohol. Now, I would not say that I ever had a problem with alcohol. I did not drink alcohol every day, really ever in my life. I wouldn't say that I overconsumed from any perspective, but I just realized early this year that I didn't like how much I wanted it. I didn't like how much I wanted to have a drink. And again, as I shared earlier, I know that I've got people who have alcohol addiction in my family, right? It's genetically wired. And I just decided, I'm going to choose to see, what is my year like if I don't choose alcohol. We don't have to wait until something is a problem to decide that we want to change what we are doing in relationship to that substance, right? So if you sit and think right now, where am I getting my dopamine? It might be food. Food is such a frequent thing that we turn to, and unfortunately, in healthcare, the irony is, right, that we are very frequently surrounded by really unhealthy foods, but those big hits of dopamine. There's always donuts in the break room, right? The hospital cafeteria is just full of a lot of really unhealthy choices. It is just very easy. My clinic is right across from this amazing bakery where every single day they have amazing sort of pastries. I just pretend that it's not there, because I don't want to be seeking that every day. That's not in alignment with my health goals. So think about for yourself, what is it that really lights me up, but lights me up in a way that doesn't seem like it's serving me well? You may find that you are constantly scrolling social media, and every moment that you're a little bit bored or you're a little bit frustrated or overwhelmed, irritated, you turn to your phone and you open Facebook or Instagram, whatever your app of choice is, right? And start scrolling because you are looking for a hit of something to feel good and to change the way that you feel. Now that behavior is called numbing, right? Where we're trying to take away some other unpleasurable emotion, but dopamine is the pathway there. So, what is it that you are currently doing to seek dopamine? And is it working for you? If it is working for you and it's not causing any problems and you're totally satisfied, you're probably not listening to this show, but there might be some of you who really feel like you are locked in a good place with this. And if that's the case, congratulations. I am happy for you. But for the rest of us, if you find that you are turning to places for your dopamine that don't really work well for you, you're hitting up sugary coffee drinks, you're eating those donuts, you are constantly seeking praise and recognition, you are, never wanting to say no because you want to be the person who's a helper, right? We have a lot of that dopamine trajectory that's baked into that. Let's see where those places are and let's try and figure out, okay, well, this is what I'm doing. This is the problem that it might be causing. What do I want to try to do differently knowing that I am a totally normal human being for wanting to get some pleasure and for my brain being wired this way, right? That acceptance is really key to doing this process in a better way, in a way that is more likely to be successful, right? When you try and see it from this perspective instead of beating yourself up here. So, what are some other things that we could do to get ahead of dopamine? One thing that I'm really leaning into is that when somebody expresses gratitude, I am really taking a moment to feel it, right? If somebody thanks me for doing something, I am taking a moment to pause and really let the gratitude come in. Now, that is different from the people pleasing and the sort of seeking of a thank you. This is an instance where I am no longer brushing aside the gratitude that probably comes towards us more often than we recognize, but we are taught to minimize ourselves. We are taught to brush things aside, right? We are taught to always want to strive to be better, and it can be very easy to miss those. And so when I choose to sit and acknowledge the gratitude and really let myself feel it and feel involved in improving someone's life experience, like whatever that is, I'm going to choose to feel it because that fills my cup. It fills my dopamine, right? So that may be something that you want to try and turn to. You may be used to slamming down a cup of coffee with a whole bunch of, I don't know, creamer or sugar and, kind of getting that hit. We're going to come back to that when we talk about epinephrine, but maybe we could take more pleasure in a coffee ritual in the morning, right? Where we're able to really just kind of pause, smell the aroma, really savor that first sip. That sounds like, oh, I don't have time for that. But I am talking about something that could be a very short process. It might even just be a minute, right? Even if you pick up your coffee on the way to work from the coffee shop, right? To really just let yourself enjoy that first sip and really taste it and appreciate it and maybe close your eyes and take a deep breath, right? It can be a very simple practice. We get a little natural hit of dopamine from that little bit of activity, and that helps to show us that pleasure can be easily obtained in little ways throughout our day that help add up to a fuller day, a better day, right? Because when we're competing with these giant hits of dopamine that often are waiting for us at the end of the day, right? We're probably, if we're an ice cream eater, if we are, a wine drinker, or gambling porn, we are probably doing those things at the end of the day, right? When we don't have any resources left, when we've spent a hard, busy day, doing what it is we do. And maybe, just maybe, if we started adding little intentional pleasures throughout the day, we wouldn't feel that desperate need to go and get that big hit. You see how that all works together. There might be other things that you choose to seek out, right? Things that are naturally pleasurable and rewarding. But really think about, where am I currently getting that dopamine hit from? When is it happening? Is it only happening at the end of the day? And how do I want to choose to fill that part of my cup differently? Let's move on to talking about oxytocin. Oxytocin is sometimes called the love hormone, and it's really about connection. So, if you are someone who has been pregnant and been through a labor and a delivery of some kind, right? There has been oxytocin involved in your life, but we all have oxytocin in our brains. We all have that, and that hormone really drives us to connect. Now, it is intentionally there to help us connect with other humans, whether that be partners so that we mate, whether that be children so that we are are, attached into their evolution and growth so that they can, eventually become independent creatures, right? You read evolutionary literature, right? You can see that humans stay in a relatively underdeveloped state for a longer time than other species, right? You think about the wobbly deer or giraffe who stands up and walks within a few hours of birth, right? We don't walk until, 9, 10, 11, 12 months, right? It's quite a long time. And we need oxytocin to help create strong bonds between parent and child in order to be able to keep the species alive, right, and propagated. And so, again, this is a natural hormone, and I'd say it's probably one that we don't think about a lot. Now, if you think about where am I connected with other people throughout the day, you may be having a lot of hurried, brief, tense experiences with people. You may not have time with your friends and family, right? So I think this is a neurotransmitter, quite frankly, that probably a lot of us are low on, right? But think about how you feel when you get to snuggle with a pet, a child, a loved one, right? When you get to get together with a friend that you haven't seen for a long time and really just fall right back into conversation and knowing each other and being together. When we have that loving connection with other humans, we feel more complete. We feel more satisfied, right? And you can see that if we are in that way, if we are making sure that we are getting intentional oxytocin throughout our day, then we're probably less likely to overdose on the dopamine, right? They go together, they are both important. And I would say oxytocin is probably something that, again, we are tending to be low on. So, what could you do? What are you doing and what could you do so that you make sure you're filling this part of your cup? Making sure that you hug people in your lives and really hug them. And I'm talking about with consent, with permission, make it appropriate, right? But that 10 to 20-second really deep hug that will stimulate that response and feel loving. Now, that's longer than most of us, I would say, hug in most social settings. But when you think about the people who are most important to you, or maybe the fur babies who are most important to you, are you creating that loving touch and connection? Now, loving touch is not the only way to get oxytocin, right? But it is a tried and true way. And if that is not a part of your existence for whatever reason, where will you choose to get the oxytocin? How will you stay in connection? And I'm not talking about interaction, but I'm talking about real connection with people that you love and value in your life so that we make sure that we are satisfying that part. All right, let's talk about serotonin. Now, serotonin is about mood and well being, right? And yes, there may be times where we end up on a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, right? Your SSRIs, because we are really run down. I think it's very interesting how many physicians end up on antidepressants. And quite frankly, I've always wondered if we were able to better take care of ourselves, if we were able to be better supported in our work so that we made sure we got our needs met, that we were able to do the work, how many of those prescriptions would not be necessary? I don't know. I'm not aware of any studies on that, but I would say that if we are able to take really good care of ourselves, and I mean that really holistically, I mean sunlight in the morning, I mean being able to feed and water yourself appropriately and get to the bathroom, to be able to have exercise and healthy food and all of those really important things, adequate sleep, if our serotonin would be better balanced. I've been reading a lot lately about gut microbiome, right? Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is created in large extent in the gut by the healthy bacteria. And when we are feeding ourselves a fiber-rich diet, natural plant fibers, right? Just real food that grows out of the ground, we will make more serotonin. And that is part of the mind gut connection, right? Is that when we are producing more serotonin because we are feeding ourselves good foods, we will generally feel better. We will have less anxiety, right? We will have less depression. I think that's really fascinating. I think in medicine, we need to look more at that. But here, think about, where am I not getting the right balance of serotonin simply by ignoring my basic needs? Because with no judgment, friends, we've been taught to ignore our basic needs. And it's very easy in the busyness of the work that we do, in the very real human demands of the work that we do, that we continue to ignore our basic needs, right? That we don't eat healthy food, that we don't get adequate water and rest and daylight and connection, right? This is another neurotransmitter, right, that we are probably typically low on unless we are being intentional. So, where am I going to help myself? How can I help myself to be able to get more of those things? If you've listened to the show for any length of time, you know I'm going to argue that you take care of yourself first, that you not wait to sleep until you're 100% finished with all your charts, that you not wait to exercise until every piece of work you could possibly do is complete. Because when we live that way, there will always be enough work to fill up our days so much that we don't have the time to be able to sleep and exercise and take good care of our bodies. So it's really important that we start to think about putting those things first, making sure that those are priorities for ourselves so that we can feel good and be able to continue doing the very important work that we do. All right, let's talk about epinephrine. So, epinephrine is, also a necessary chemical in our bodies, and certainly we think about it as responsible for fight or flight. But if you just think about it from a positive perspective, this is something that, you think about energy, you think about excitement and the enhancement that that can bring. But where are we currently getting that from? I would say, yeah, for a lot of us, it's over drinking caffeine, right? There may be, for some people, there may be other, risky behaviors that people are engaging in. When we think about some of the difficulty with drug use, right? The 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 epinephrine sort of release that people get from using certain street drugs, for example, is, an initial driver for some of those behaviors, right? Again, we are not broken human beings for being wired this way, but we need to consider, what am I relying on to try and get energy? Am I overusing caffeine? Am I overusing other substances? That certainly happens. We're not immune to that. But what do I need to do differently in order to create healthy energy, healthy excitement in my life? Where should we naturally get epinephrine from? Exercise, right? The endorphins. You could say that the dose in could be endorphins rather than epinephrine. That'd be another fine way to look at it, and I've definitely seen it written that way as well. But where do we get that excitement energy? So exercise is a natural one. Now, not everyone, and especially if you're feeling, really burned out, you're probably not going to jump up into exercise, but I want to plant it in your brain that that needs to be a part of the component eventually. Where else? Sex, uh, orgasm, right? That is a natural endorphin producing activity or experience for people. And friends, I'm talking about, consensual behavior here. Uh, but think about, am I getting hits of excitement and pleasure in that way, these endorphin rushes. People also, this is why people love the cold plunges so much, which, I just, I can't even do that. My excuse is I have Raynaud's and I would die, but, um, are you seeking adventure? Are you engaging in things that you find exciting that ultimately add good things to your life, right? That are net positive? Where are those endorphins? Where is that positive energy coming from? And do you need to make any shifts there? So let's recap here. Dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, epinephrine/endorphins. Where are you at in terms of your current dose? Do you want to make any changes? Really think about, where do these needs come up? How are they currently being met or not met? How can I start to make changes that are in alignment with the version of me that I want to be, right? With the version of me that feels more healthy, feels more balanced, feels like they are in alignment with my goals. What changes do I want to make? And as you are thinking about this, really dig in, really understand why you turn to certain things and figure out, okay, how am I going to choose to do things differently so that I can have a different outcome? I love doing this work with people. I love helping them to really understand their patterns. And friends, I'm here with you, right? This is work that I'm exploring on myself all the time because we are all on a journey. All right, friends, think about your dose. I would love to hear from you if you really sit down with this and learn something about yourself. So please be sure to drop me a line. You can leave a comment in your favorite podcast player, or send me a message, Megan at healthierforgood.com. All right, friends, until next week, take care.